Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the next speaker for the conference. Please allow me to introduce to you Dr. Eghosa Ekhator. Dr. Ekhator is an associate professor of international environmental law at the University of Derby with extensive experience in environmental justice, climate law, and natural resource governance, particularly in Africa and the Global South. A qualified barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, he holds an LLB from the University of Benin and an LLM and PhD from the University of Hull. His research focuses on the intersections of environmental justice, energy transitions, human rights, and climate litigation, with a strong emphasis on developing countries in particular. Dr. Ekhator has published widely and contributed to policy debates with his work cited by international organizations and government bodies. He also serves as the co-lead of the International Environmental and Human Rights Law Research Cluster at Derby, advancing interdisciplinary research on sustainability and global justice. His work bridges academia, policy, and practice, contributing to equitable and just approaches to global environmental governance. Dr. Ekhator, the floor is yours, please. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, inviting me to be part of this amazing workshop and conference. So what I'm doing is it's quite different from what other people have done, but I'm just going to discuss corporate accountability and how we can use climate mitigation to tackle a corporate responsibility of multinational corporations from a Nigerian perspective. So why Nigeria? Nigeria is known for having one of the biggest victims of environmental injustices in Niger Delta region, where you have the multinational corporation oil and gas companies have their activities over more than 60, 70 years have had negative impact on a lot of on the people, society in the Niger Delta. So in that regard, so how can we use existing legal frameworks in Nigeria to hold MNCs accountable? So that's what this talk is about today. So just the outline is about MNC and sustainability litigation, the impact of MNCs on climate change, sustainability, climate change, and litigation in Nigeria, and the way forward conclusion. So I'll just quickly run around this just to have, when we say sustainability, CSRO, sustainable development, they have different meanings to different people. Most times, people tend to use CSRO, sustainability, corporate sustainability interchangeably, but it's always good to have your own definition. What you're talking about CSRO, for example, you have to have your definition of CSRO. What do you mean by CSRO? A lot of people see the idea that or theory that companies have a duty towards society beyond its primary obligations to its shareholders or owners. Then CSR is a very important part of international business environment. So CSRO is also a synonym for corporate citizenship, corporate management, triple bottom line, etc. So a lot of people tend to use CSRO interchangeably with business ethics. So we're not focused on CSRO in this talk. We're basically focused on corporate accountability, corporate sustainability from the perspective of companies. So how do we define corporate sustainability? It relates to the issue of corporate governance and good board practices. So it's how companies are engaging in activities that will benefit them. How companies are trying to think about the negative impact of their activities from the start and trying to put in practices and strategies to mitigate those impacts on not just their or not just the people close to them or the entities close to them, other stakeholders like communities, like the environment, like their contractors, etc. So in that regard, so sustainability also provides us a measure for us to understand how a company is living up to its responsibility as a corporate citizen in the world. So even though this awareness of sustainability has increased in different parts of the world, companies are not really doing so much in that regard. So a lot of people are saying that are we going to make accountability and sustainability to mandatory, or do we need to continue to be from a very sort of like voluntary basis? So for a lot of people, some people use the term corporate sustainability, some use CSRO, some use corporate sustainability, corporate accountability, whatever prism you're taking, just identify, qualify, and explain what you mean by the term that you're using regarding that form. So for me, in the context of this talk, corporate sustainability just means how companies should live up to its economic, social, and governance sort of responsibilities to not just its directors or its owners, but to the larger society and other stakeholders. So now, in terms of MNCs and climate change, there's no sort of no controversy anymore that MNCs are set to be one of the biggest contributors to climate change in different parts of the world. Fossil fuel companies have been seen as needed to take responsibility for this. So a lot of reports have actually been done now. MNCs, the emissions generated by MNCs is quite massive. If you look at many of these MNCs, many of them are located, the headquarters are located in the Western world, global north, but the majority of their factories are found in the global south. A good example is Nigeria, where you have the big oil MNCs having factories and refineries in Nigeria. But it's not just MNCs from the global north that is engaging in contribute to climate change. You also have MNCs from countries like Saudi Arabia, India, China, and even from Nigeria as well, whose activities also have some impact to climate change. So because of that, MNCs are seen as one of the key stakeholders in trying to tackle the scourge of climate change. MNCs are now at the forefront of developing and embedding greenhouse gas targets as one of the strategies to combat the effect of climate change. So we also know that some people have actually said that yes, even though MNCs are trying to be good corporate citizens, many of the changes that have been done by the MNCs is actually as a result of the pressure or influence by other stakeholders such as NGOs, government, amongst others. Some people have actually argued that many MNCs are engaging in corporate sustainability practices as a business strategy, as a means of profit maximization as well. Some have argued that going green or going green as a company, being seen as a sustainable company, does have a lot of financial benefits for companies as such. So the Paris Agreement is also one of the triggers, sort of the recent development that have impacted on how corporate sustainability is becoming more ingrained in the activities of companies. So a lot of people have also said that many MNCs are not meeting their net zero climate change pledges. And now, if you look at in the last few years, due to what is happening in different parts of the world, there has been a pushback against net zero. There has been a pushback against low carbon economy. There has been a pushback against renewables. So many companies, many countries are thinking about energy sovereignty. Okay, so one of the ways to hold MNCs accountable in terms of to live up to their responsibility that arising from national laws or arising from their sort of international commitments or international sort of CSR sort of mechanism is climate litigation. So how do we define climate litigation? There are different perceptions or definitions of climate litigation. For a lot of people, climate litigation is when a case has direct connection to climate change and allied issues. So that is sort of like the global north, the sort of the narrow definition of climate litigation. However, many global south scholars, some African scholars, they tend to adopt a broader definition of climate litigation by saying that existing environmental rights cases, existing environmental litigation cases has been reconceptualized as climate litigation, whether they have peripheral or central connections with climate change. So, from an African perspective, more often than not, some African scholars look at a case, not categorize a case as climate litigation, not because it has direct connection, but because it has either a peripheral or direct connection with climate change issues. So climate litigation has become very, very popular, and you have countries like India, Pakistan, different countries in Europe that climate mitigation is now being used as a tool to hold companies accountable. But I'm not focused on the use of climate mitigation to hold government and other actors. We are focused on holding multinational corporations accountable in this regard. So there has been a rise of cases in different parts of the world. There are very few cases very few recorded case law on climate mitigation. So many of the international climate mitigation databases tend to have very few cases related to Africa. But people have said that this is going to change very soon, and some have said that because of language and access to information issues, many of these climate mitigation cases in Africa are not being reported or seen in the sort of this international climate litigation database. And also, if you are aware, there's this request for the advisory opinion proceedings that is pending for the African Court on Human Rights. So a lot of scholars have said that the African human rights system, which includes the African Convention on Human Rights, the African Court of Human Rights, and also the AWC for children as well, can be used as a tool to promote climate mitigation on the continent. Also, many African countries have developed standalone climate change laws, which also have implications on the compelling or ensuring that MNCs promote climate change awareness and respect climate change obligations. Countries like Kenya, Benin, Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa do actually have a standalone climate change law. So now, from Nigerian context, now, how can we use existing Nigerian frameworks to promote corporate accountability? So some of the existing laws in Nigeria includes the Communist and Allied Matters Act, Climate Change Act. So in this part, I'm going to look at some cases and some laws, whether these laws promote explicit or implicit connections between corporate sustainability in the Nigerian context. So in many parts of the world, a major stumbling block to sustainable communities is this corporate governance architecture, this shareholder primacy, which says that a company is only as sort of like is only accountable to his shareholders and directors, etc. So people have said that that is sort of neoliberal market-based conceptualization of global corporate governance is a massive stumbling block to actualizing corporate accountability or corporate sustainability. That except we basically rethink or reconceptualize how we look at corporate governance. If we see corporate governance as a shareholder-centric sort of framework, it's very, very difficult to ensure that other stakeholders do play a very important role. So however, we should know that the shareholder primacy does not mean that other stakeholders are relegated. Even though we have shareholder primacy in many parts of the world, companies are also urged to respect the interest of other persons, other entities outside of their shareholders as well. So in the Nigerian context, the Communist and Allied Act was revised and in 2020, and it's the primary corporate law in the country. Similarly to different parts, similar to what occurs in many common law countries, the Karma in Nigeria is still premised on the shareholder-centric model. However, some have said that the Karma, going to the provision of the Nigerian Karma, it does have some implications for sustainability and climate mitigation in Nigerian context. Scholars like Mirungi and the recent BICL report on Nigeria have argued that Section 305, Section 3 of the Nigerian Karma, which relates to duties of directors, can be used as a basis for corporate climate mitigation in the future. You also have Section 308 and 377 in this regard as well. So even though there's no explicit provisions in Nigerian Karma which expressly states that directors will take account of climate concerns, Mirungi and other scholars, including myself, have argued that directors' duties are usually interpreted in the context of the issues of the day. So if you look at the Karma from a prism of corporate sustainability, from a prism of how to promote corporate accountability and corporate climate mitigation, yes, the Karma can be a tool to be used to hold companies in Nigeria in terms of their corporate sustainability expectations. So also, corporation law, company law, evidenced by the Karma, can be a tool to ensure that companies can be sued in that regard. Then in the Nigerian report, the BIS Nigerian report says that why no corporate climate mitigation has arisen on the basis of Nigerian common law. The recent Karma 2020 has a clear potential to engender and support such an action. So however, some have argued that it might be difficult to actually to proceed on corporate climate mitigation under the Karma. But as scholars, my plea to our colleagues who are practicing as lawyers that they should try and look at these laws and see how they can premise their litigation of these Nigerian laws on how to hold companies accountable as well. So we also have the Nigerian Climate Change Act, which is the first and the only standalone law in Nigeria. Climate change. It provides a framework for achieving low gas emissions, mainstreaming climate actions, etc. Nigerian context. So what are some of the main innovations of the Climate Change Act Nigeria? Provides a framework for achieving low greenhouse gas emissions, and embedded climate action national programs. The Climate Change Act Nigeria also talks about the possibility of development of the Climate Change Fund, carbon tax, and the law is applicable to both private and public companies government agencies and bodies as well. So some scholars believe that the Climate Change Act is not pro climate change friendly because issues around local standard that it's very difficult for the relevant stakeholders such as community to have the legal standing to sue. That is the view by Okoli and Abraham. On the other hand, myself and Professor Laden have argued that this climate litigation can be premised on the Nigerian Climate Change Act. So hopefully we have cases in the future that will take this argument and how we can use the Climate Change Act as a tool to promote corporate climate mitigation in Nigerian context. Also, Nigeria can also learn from Kenya. In Kenya, local standard, which is legal standard, is readily available for victims of environmental and energy injustices based on the constitutional right to environmental protection in Kenya Constitution. So my view is that if scholars are saying that the Nigerian Climate Change Act do not explicitly promote the right of the victims to sue, then the Nigerian government or the Parliament, Nigerian National Assembly should think of revising the Climate Change Act, amending the Climate Change Act to grant explicit legal standing to victims of climate change in Nigeria in this regard. So, from a climate litigation perspective, some have said that there are no explicit climate cases in Nigeria. However, other scholars believe that existing climate change law, some environmental litigation cases in Nigeria can be conceptualized as climate mitigation. So a good example is BEMRI against Shell and the Center for Air Pollution Watch against NNPC. So scholars such as myself, we conceptualize and recategorize these cases as climate mitigation or cases in the Nigerian context. So why have scholars said that the BEMRI and the Center for Air Pollution cases are climate mitigation cases? These two cases are internationally recognized as especially being climate cases, and environmental and climate change justice issues are very close in these cases. So, from a Nigerian context, we can actually say that the BEMRI and Shell case, and Center for Air Pollution and NNPC cases are two of the cases that can be seen to be climate litigation cases in Nigerian context. But some people believe that these are not climate mitigation cases because it's not climate issues are not explicit. But our view is that if you read these cases very well, if you look at the rulings of the judgment itself, you can actually extrapolate climate issues from these cases, and from that perspective, even though there's peripheral connections to climate change issues, we believe that these cases are climate mitigation cases, and these cases can be a tool to hold MNCs accountable for their corporate sustainability expectation in the Nigerian context. So the concluding remarks that laws and institutions for the defense of human rights must evolve to adapt to the new reality of climate change. So we can use our existing framework as a tool to ensure that companies do live up to their corporate sustainability expectations. Then, if you are interested in climate litigation databases, there are many of them in different parts of the world. So you have the Sabin Center, you have the Latin American database, you have the Australian Pacific Climate Change Litigation Database, you have the Brazilian database. So I think for me, what is missing is that I'm not sure there's an African database of climate litigation cases. I think that's one thing African scholars can start thinking about. We need to start collating all these climate litigation cases and develop like a repository, develop a database for these African cases from the African context. So if you're interested in climate mitigation cases in Nigeria, there have been rising scholarship on climate mitigation in Nigeria. So many of these works are available online. You can look at the BICU sort of project, which is titled Global Perspective of Crime of Corporate Climate Legal Tactics. This report by the BICL focuses on 17 countries, and it also includes Nigeria and Kenya. There's also a Brazil national report. There's also a UK national report. So if you're interested, you can go there as well. I was part of this project, a part of people that reviewed the Nigerian reports as well, developed the Nigerian report. Also, this BICL project also has developed a global toolbox for corporate climate mitigation. So as scholars, as judges, as stakeholders, we need to engage with these databases and this toolbox to improve our understanding of climate issues. So some of my selected references. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ekhator. Great insights. In the interest of time, I'm going to quickly pose two questions to you that we've gotten from the attendees. The first question is from Divya. The question is, women leadership plays an important role in energy transition, yet their presence at the decision level, policy making level is largely absent. What can be done to accelerate their leadership roles so that the journey towards green transition becomes easier?
Thank you. Did you say women?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Women
thank you.
leadership.
Yeah, I think it's very is a very very one of the biggest sort of weaknesses of Nigerian legal framework. The lack of mainstreaming of the views of not just women but the victims of environmental and climate injustice. For example, what about children? What about people living with disability? What about the low host community? And also the thing is that when these laws are being developed, women and others relevant groups should be part of the process. So in my work that I do from a UK perspective, because I also do research on environmental justice in the UK, we develop a toolkit, environmental justice framework. So in that toolkit, we believe that co-production is the way to go. So the question is, the laws that are being made in the African context, are these laws being co-produced with the people, or are these laws just being made by the national assemblies and parliament and forced on the people? So the lawmaking process has to involve the people. The people have to have their say and actually be meaningfully consulted. It's not that they'll start consulting them after the deed has been done. And two, the various national policies on energy, on climate, do those policies create some form of role for women and other vulnerable members of communities? Those have to be done through thoroughly. If they are not done thoroughly, climate the laws, climate litigation will just be a failure. And also, litigation is not the answer. Litigation is a reactive framework. Litigation is mainly used in the African context when the climate change laws are failing. So the government has to have political will to enforce those laws. The MNCs have to respect those laws, and the people have to have a say. So it's not just one way to tackle the problem. It has to be an overarching, a very, very well integrated sort of solutions to the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The second question is from Abdullahi Mansour from Nigeria. And the question is, what is the position of Nigeria in the global conversation and impact of renewable energy amongst developing nations?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Nigeria has got those frameworks, that has got those policies, and the government appears to be saying the right thing at the right time. But I'll just go back I just take a few steps back. So from a Nigerian perspective, the biggest MNCs, they are moving away from the oil sector. These MNCs are the ones investing in energy transition projects, investing in renewable projects. And these MNCs, over 60 years, they've violated the Niger Delta environment, they've violated the rights of the people. So what is the guarantee that these MNCs will not continue the violation? So yes, the government can make those policies. The government can say the right things about renewables. So the question is, when the country people are poor, right? When people can't access the fossil fuels, and if they can't even afford gas and the rest of them, three, at the end of the day, the renewables will that lead to energy injustices for the people. If those things are not being dealt with, all this sort of noise around renewables will not go anywhere. So that's just I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you so much for your insights, Doctor. It's been truly great listening to you. And thank you for taking the time and being a part of the Energies Conference with the Green Institute.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much, sir.